Hello everybody, Jack here, just with a quick message before the episode proper. This episode is a conversation between your usual hosts and Teddy Wilson of Radical Reports. Unfortunately, owing to technical snafus, Teddy's side of the conversation didn't record tremendously well. It didn't sound all that great. I've done my audio editing magic as much as I can, and I've made it, I think, perfectly listenable. There might be times where you find it a little bit hard to hear what he's saying. I've done the best I can, but it is all on there, and it is well worth hearing. So please stick with us and enjoy. This is I Don't Speak German. Here we talk about the far right, their fellow travellers, and what they say to each other when they think we're not listening. The show is hosted by Daniel Harper and me, Jack Graham. We're both he, him. Be aware, we cover difficult, sometimes nasty subject matter, so content warnings always apply. And welcome back, listeners, to another episode of I Don't Speak German, the first episode, I'm presuming, unless something happens in the interim, the first episode of 2025. It's a whole new year. I think as Dorothy Parker once said, what, we're having another one? And I'm here with Daniel Harper, of course. Daniel, how was your New Year and all that sort of stuff?
Oh, it was. I mean, it all kind of, once you get above the age of like 23, I think it all just kind of sloshes together. Jack and I were kind of talking beforehand that like I've always like marked my birthdays as more like, the New Year resolution does not come on January 1st, but like on my birthday. And so right now I'm just like, well, I got 3 months to kind of think about this before I really have to, feel the impending doom of like my own mortality. So it's the beauty of having a March birthday is you get that little, I get to wait till spring basically. So that's where we are.
Nothing like starting on an upbeat note. So thanks for that,
I mean,
Harper.
Because I don't speak German. That's practically the ray of sunshine. It's,
that is,
eventually
that is
we'll
true.
all be dead and won't have to worry about this anymore. It'll be our children's problem,
Yeah. An unexpectedly Keynesian opening. In the long run, we're all dead. But we are lucky. It's not just us this time. We are very, very happy and honoured to welcome back to the podcast for his return appearance with IDSG, the excellent Teddy Wilson of Radical Reports. Teddy, are you out there listening to our inane drivel?
Yes, thank you so much for having me on. I am listening with great amusement.
Thank you. That's very charitable of you. So, as I say, Teddy Wilson is the excellent reporter behind Radical Reports, which Teddy's been on this show before to talk about Moms for Liberty, and we've talked about his site on this show before. Great reporter. And Teddy, you, I believe, have been... Daniel and I have had to confess to Teddy that we're not really up on the subject that he's come on the show to talk about this evening. Neither of us have really done our due diligence on this subject, because we do have a couple of other things that we pay attention to. But Teddy, you have come on the show today to talk to us a little bit about what's been going on with the whole January 6th schmozzle and the committee and all that sort of thing. So tell us, what have you been working on with that?
Right. Well, I mean, over the last, Jesus Christ, it's been almost 4 years.
Coming up. At the time of recording.
I have been doing quite a bit of reporting and tracking of what has happened since the January 6th insurrection, primarily focusing on all the different court cases, and then, of course, the January 6th investigation by the House Select Committee. And then specifically over the last several weeks, I've been focused on reporting on what's going to happen with the investigations in the criminal cases and other things related to January 6th as President-elect Trump is set to take office on January 20th, and the consequences of that, both in terms of the possibility of him pardoning either all or many of the January 6th defendants, and the possibility of him and people in his administration either, taking revenge on and targeting people that took part in either the January 6th committee's investigation or prosecutors that worked on those cases revolving around January 6th and the people involved in it. That's primarily what I've been focused on in the last month, kind of thinking through and reporting out what are going to be the consequences for what happens when a president who encouraged a violent insurrection comes back into office. And so that's pretty much what's been my primary focus the last month or so.
Yeah, it's quite a situation. A president who essentially incited, at the very least, and I think that's putting it mildly, incited an attempted overthrow of the established democratic government of the country. Not only not held accountable for that legally in the 4 years since, but re-elected and about to take back power after some legal work has been done, but while legal work is still going on the cases of people that took part in his insurrection. It's almost like so many things that we live in as normality now. It's almost unbelievable when you put it in bold terms.
Yeah, and it really stands, I think, in stark relief when you compare it to what has happened internationally. So the aftermath of a similar insurrection in Brazil that happened a couple of years later on January 8th. And prosecutors in Brazil are going about preventing Jair Bolsonaro from attempting to run for president again. And then more recently, you have President South Korea, who basically has staged a similar event declaring martial law, and how the parliament there swiftly rebuked him and impeached him and his successor, the vice president that took over. So it's really something that America has now become a place where presidents can act with impunity, it seems. And then you have institutions like the Supreme Court validating that as well. And I think that has some pretty terrifying consequences we might have to live in the next 4 years.
I mean, to be clear, I just want to clarify this. Republican presidents can act with impunity under this system. You know, you wouldn't. I would hesitate to guess, as much as I detest parts of what the Democratic Party has become, that a future president AOC could act in any kind of similar way.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I try not to play the imagine if a Democrat did this. You know, imagine if Obama did this, or if Clinton did that, or Biden more recently did that. But I mean, just looking at the far right response to President Biden's recent pardons and commutations, you can argue about the merits of some of his commutations. I mean, I think I tend to applaud his commutations of the 40-something federal inmates that were on death row, right, commuting their sentences, preventing incoming President Trump from going on another federal death penalty killing spree. And you can argue about whether or not he should have pardoned his son, Hunter Biden, for his things he was convicted of. But I think the response from the right has been to kind of rage and gnash their teeth about it. And it's remarkable how little they care about any perceived hypocrisy of it, right? It's that charge of hypocrisy just doesn't seem like it matters anymore. It doesn't seem like a useful piece of rhetorical.
It's been years since like any kind of accusation of hypocrisy has had any kind of real staying power. I think on both sides to some degree. I don't think that's I think that's a just modern American politics problem. And by the way, I've been making a project of like tuning into Megyn Kelly on a regular basis, so I am very, very well acquainted with exactly all of the problems with the Biden pardons of both his son and many other people. So Megyn Kelly is there's an episode in that. Don't worry, that's a slow burn, but I kind of have been like dipping my toes back into like normie politics by following like Megyn Kelly kind of relentlessly on the right and Ezra Klein on the left. Those are my like bellwethers for oh my God, left-right politics in the United States. And I think that's kind of valid in the sense of I can bear both, and they're both interesting in their own ways. Anyway, I'm off the topic, but anyway, Jack, you probably have have things to talk about that are not Megyn Kelly and Ezra Klein. So
that is a nightmare blunt rotation right there. I would not be anywhere near that. I will give Megyn Kelly credit for one thing. I don't often watch her. I usually see clips of her, but I have come to appreciate just the liberal usage of the word "fuck"
oh yeah,
that she is. I tend to appreciate. So I will give her credit for that.
yeah. Leaving Fox News for Sirius XM was probably the best thing that ever happened to her career, honestly.
Well, I'm glad to hear that there is an episode in this, and that you're not just hurting yourself for no reason. Because as Teddy says, that's a nightmarish diet. Yeah, I mean, aside from the observation that I think accusations of hypocrisy cast against the right have no traction because, in a very real sense, they're not hypocrites, because their open ideology is that certain people are better than other people and just should be allowed to do what they like, and that there are no rules for them, whereas there are rules for other people. You know, if that is your ideology and you openly espouse that, then when people accuse you of having a double standard, then you can just shrug and say, yeah, exactly. That's what we're saying. So, but aside from that, I mean, let's wrestle ourselves back onto the topic, January 6th. What is going on in the ranks, shall we say, if you know, in the ranks of people who were involved in the investigation and who are currently still involved in attempts to investigate and prosecute people behind this? There must be nervousness, surely.
There is. And I'll start with the law enforcement side of it first, and then kind of discuss what my reporting has turned out regarding the people that worked on the committee that were staffers. What we've seen on the law enforcement side is that investigators and prosecutors and law enforcement has continued to investigate those who participated in January 6th. Primarily, it's focused on people that entered the Capitol and took part in violent actions. You know, there are constantly new arrests that are taking place. Just about once or twice a week, there are new arrests being made. There have been more than 1,500 people arrested for participating in the Capitol riot. And like I mentioned, the vast majority of recent arrests seem to have been people that weren't just the people that kind of entered the Capitol and kind of walked around. They have been people that assaulted police officers or participated in other kind of violent actions. Those people have continued to be arrested and charged. And it's been interesting. While the prosecutors and law enforcement have continued that, you've seen a lot of consternation from, I think, judges overseeing a lot of these cases in recent months, kind of seeing what has been kind of potentially coming down since Trump was elected, understanding that there's a good possibility that many of these people that are before them in court might get pardons. And a lot of the defendants have essentially been kind of arguing that they shouldn't face any jail time because they're probably going to get pardoned anyway. And then there's even now U.S. attorneys and people within federal law enforcement and prosecutors that are kind of making their way for the exit before Trump takes office. Just this week, the U.S. attorney for Washington, D.C., who is a big part of the investigation on January 6th, announced his resignation, and he's leaving as U.S. attorney before Trump takes office, I think. And so on the law enforcement side, while there has continued to be investigation and prosecution of those that participated, I think there is a sense of maybe unknown of what might be next at the very least, and to a kind of a fearful attitude of what might be next as well. On the investigation side, I reached out to more than a dozen former staffers of the January 6th Select Committee, either directly or indirectly through intermediary, pretty much in the weeks following the election. And it turned out that only one person would end up going on the record with me. A few others would speak only if they were given anonymity to protect their identities. There was even a few others that seemed to want to talk to me, but then as we got closer to the new year, ended up backing out and deciding they didn't want to speak either publicly or even on background. There ended up being a surprising amount of kind of fear from these people, it seems, as President Trump was getting closer and closer to taking office again. And I think a lot of that is the things that he said publicly about wanting to prosecute and put in jail the members of Congress that served on the committee, as well as his supporters and potential members of his administration that have talked openly about seeking a retribution and revenge against his perceived political opponents. Especially when it comes to the staff members, these are people that are essentially civil servants. Many of them have worked in and out of government before. Many of them are lawyers. These are people that are not kind of notable household names, but several of them have faced threats and harassment online from the far right in different places online. And I think there's a real worry that about kind of both from the potential of being targeted by the Trump administration or administration officials, but also about being targeted by Trump's supporters and being harassed and targeted for death threats or other kinds of really disturbing actions. That's kind of where we are at the moment, kind of weeks away from President Trump taking oath of office.
And of course, we have seen an emboldening since the re-election of Trump. We've seen, I believe, an uptick in harassment and stuff like that from his supporters, including stuff from Elon Musk, who has specifically targeted people on Twitter or X, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was Elon Musk was something that was brought up. He's an individual that was actually brought up more than once by the people I talked to.
I can imagine.
Him and Vivek Ramaswamy in their so-called Department of Government Efficiency, the Doge cabinet or whatever the fuck they want to call themselves. He has gone after essentially random government workers on Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, now X, and targeted them. And when you have more than 200 million followers, and you target kind of random government workers, that creates a real security risk for those folks, right? And so I think a lot of these people that have worked either for the committee or elsewhere done investigations since January 6th, I think there's a real worry that people like Trump or other kind of far right, social media influencers might use their giant megaphones to target people. So yeah, that's a big part of it. And in addition to that, when you kind of delve further down the rabbit hole, there is a real kind of visceral, nasty kind of anger towards anyone within the Biden administration that took part in those investigations. And you see people claiming that not just the people the members of Congress that served on the committee, but their staff and anyone associated should be prosecuted and tried for treason and face other kind of really nasty, horrible kind of things. It gets dark really fast the further you go down those rabbit holes.
Yeah, it's a very frightening combination of the possibility of official persecution or official interfering in the legal process, is some combination of the two from above, as it were, and then unofficial harassment and intimidation from below as part of essentially, two wings of one movement moving in tandem to intimidate anybody involved in the legal process against people who've also been part of the same movement.
And then when you add into that the possibility of someone like Kash Patel taking over the FBI, someone that's been extremely vocal about wanting to use this giant federal law enforcement agency to enact retribution against perceived political opponents. I think it does give it the fear of real legitimacy, but it's not just kind of a maybe question for a lot of people. It's almost like, when is this going to happen to people, either to me or to people I know? So yeah, it's a real fear, I think, and it's underguarded as you kind of laid out there by whether or not it comes from an official source. It could come from supporters and other far right extremists. It has created a real, I think, security nightmare for people.
There's this weird sense in which the boundaries between these sort of different wings of this same movement are blurred now. And I think Doge, or whatever you want to, what is the Department of Government Efficiency that called? That's not an official organization, is it? It's not an actual sort of ministry of government or anything. And yet it seems to be, it's being treated as if it has governmental power or is potentially going to have governmental power, almost just by virtue of the fact that everybody involved in this this loosely speaking organization has decided to pretend that it does. So you're at the same time that they're chipping away at the legitimacy of these actual government and legal processes, they're sort of importing a kind of unofficial shadow government, which seems to be half pretend government agency, half part of the Trump organization or affiliated with it, and another half, I've got three halves, I know, but there you go, just like part of the, I know there are splinters in the movement now, obviously over the whole visa thing, because Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy have been saying things that MAGA doesn't like about visas for migrants involved in the tech industry. Even so, there's a weird sort of blood join there, isn't there, I think?
Yeah, and I think I saw some of those splinters even earlier in an issue related to kind of all of it, right? We talked about the kind of the potential for people that investigated January 6th facing prosecution or harassment, either legally or extrajudicially. But there's another component to this, and that's the potential for Trump, when he gets into office, to pardon either all or some of the January 6th defendants. And so where we've seen fissures within kind of the greater MAGA world was about that very issue, about whether or not Trump should issue a blanket pardon for anyone, all 1,500 people that have been charged and tried or convicted for any of crimes related to January 6th, or if he should just pardon anyone that was charged or convicted of nonviolent offenses. And about, if you look at the cases, depending on how you categorize violent offenses, about 400 to 500 of those capital riot defendants have been charged with some kind of violent action, whether it was assaulting police or other kind of violent actions, or kind of either themselves being armed or using things they found as weapons. So that leaves about 1,000 people that were charged with relatively misdemeanor crimes. And so that has been kind of a fissure within the MAGA movement. But I think you're right. The debate over H1 one, I can't remember the acronym. What is it again?
I couldn't remember either. H1B, is it? Or is that a pencil?
H1B.
So those are the visas for highly skilled immigrants to come in the country. People like Musk and a lot of the other kind of billionaire tech bros are big fans of them because that allows them to import essentially, programmers and other kind of people with highly sought after tech skills, kind of with the idea of they'll be able to essentially pay them less than Americans. I think is kind of the naked real economic sense there. And that's been a big fissure recently between kind of the nativist wing of the MAGA movement and this kind of newly founded kind of tech bro part of it. And I think that's kind of been also kind of part of the discussion about what is all of this going to look like once Trump actually comes into power and has kind of levers of power at his disposal, who is going to be more influential within his administration and all of that. But yeah, that's getting back to the pardons. That's one of the things when I was talking to the people that worked on the committee, they were all pretty worried about what would happen if Trump pardoned a significant number of the people that have been convicted participating in January 6th, particularly if he did a blanket pardon and just pardoned everybody, because there's this real worry about what would happen if all of a sudden you have figures like Stuart Rhodes, who's the former leader of the far-right militia group, the Oath Keepers, that was highly involved in organizing January 6th, or people like Enrico Tario, who's the former leader of the Proud Boys, who was also real highly involved in the organizing and planning of January 6th. If you have leaders like that, people that have been convicted of sedition, right, and other violent crimes, suddenly able to kind of leave prison and go right back into the far-right extremist movement, all of a sudden with a lot of street cred because they went to jail for Trump, right, essentially. And that seems like it would add a real kind of jet fuel injection into the far-right extremist movement. It's hard to predict what that would look like, right? Since the Oath Keepers is essentially doesn't exist as an organization anymore, but the Proud Boys is arguably more organized and has evolved into something much different than it looked like on January 6th. It is much more decentralized. There's not a national level leadership. And so it's hard to predict kind of what it would look like, but from everybody I talked to, that's one of the most concerning things for them is what happens if President Trump pardons all these people. You'll have a president that incited, at the very least, incited an insurrection back into office, and all of the people that he incited, the leaders of that insurrection, will be back out on the streets. I mean, it's just kind of the worst case scenario we're kind of staring at the face.
Yeah, and with the perception created that there are no rules anymore, at least for the while Trump or somebody like him is in power, and I'm sure over the next 4 years they'll be doing everything they can to people behind Trump certainly will be doing everything they can to try to just institutionalize far right rule, no matter what elections say. The perception will, if these people are just let out again, whether or not they take up organizing where they left off, probably not directly, but even so, they will be out. The perception will be created, I suppose, that while they or their side are in charge of the government, there are just no legal rules. I suppose that's the fear, and it seems pretty well founded.
Well, there's no legal rules for people on their side. I think that when you start thinking about kind of further down the road about what may happen, like imagine if there are kind of similar protests, if there are similar protests on college campuses as they were last spring, right? When college students and a coalition of various people, from Arab Americans to Jewish Americans, were protesting against Israel's military actions in Gaza. I mean, you can easily imagine Trump sending out the National Guard and other military elements, right, to put down those protests. But if you see something similar on the opposite end of some far-right militia group trying to take over some compound or something, like seems likely to be treated with kid gloves, right? So, yeah, I think there's going to be any number of scenarios and kind of consequences that we have to kind of safely witness over the next 4 years.
Do you have sorry to interject here. Do you have a sense of like how likely this is? Like, do you have any kind of, beyond just the sense that all of us have, is that, well, it's all just going to burn down because that's just how the world works now? Like, because I think there's an argument to be made that, like, despite that Trump says a lot of shit, right? And like, we're going to free all the J6 defendants. Turns out, like, well, we're going to let like a handful of people go, and, we're going to, backhand with Roger Stone or whatever. And like, ultimately it's just going to be a sound and furiously to find nothing on this, And so, like, I don't know, do you get a sense from your interviews, from your research, like, is this something that like how likely is this? And I, sorry, not to criticize, I'm not saying it's not important to think about regardless, but, I don't know, do you have a sense of that? And if the answer is no, then we can just cut all this, but I'm just curious, what's if you do have a sense.
No. It's an important question, and I think I would put it into two different categories. First, I'll touch on the pardon part. I think it is highly likely, both from kind of just discussing through things with the people I've interviewed, talking to other kind of experts, and kind of that Trump pardons at least some portion of the January 6th defendants. Like, I think it is less likely that he would issue kind of a more blanket pardon that just pardons everybody. But I would say there's also kind of a non-zero chance that he would attempt to do something like that. I think the more problematic part of that for Trump and his advisors would be kind of figuring out a way to craft the language in a way that would work, that would cover everybody. So it would have to include people that have been convicted. It would have to include people that are currently on trial, people that have just been charged or arrested, and probably people that participated in it and haven't been arrested or haven't been charged yet. There's been plenty of people that were there on January 6th, at the end of the Capitol, that have been named, kind of basically unnamed co-defendants, or have been named in indictments that haven't themselves been indicted or arrested yet. There's been several people in recent months that have been arrested, months, and in some cases years after they were identified as people that were inside the Capitol. So I think for Trump to kind of give a blanket pardon to everybody, I'm not a legal expert, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a constitutional scholar, so I can't give you a kind of detailed explanation of what that would look like, but I think that would be the problem with that. That said, I think it is highly likely that he would pardon some portion of the January 6th defendants. When you look at the kind of the J6 kind of far right activists, the people that are really kind of wrapped up in this and are really invested in kind of the pardon, they almost uniformly have been calling for like a blanket pardon. And so they're not going to be happy unless Trump kind of just pardons everything. So we'll see what happens with the pardon. As for kind of the retribution and revenge campaign, right? When you think about how Trump and people that he may appoint to his administration may go about kind of exacting their revenge on people, I think some of it just depends on kind of who the target is and how they decide to try to exercise the levels of power. And there are going to be impediments to kind of what they want to do, just kind of institutionally, right? It doesn't matter like that Kash Patel has said that, he said that on day one, if he is confirmed as the director of the FBI, that he would close down the Hoover building, right? He'd kick everybody out and make them go fight crime. He's not literally going to be able to close down the building on day one. And there's even kind of within kind of federal law enforcement, those people are, for all intents and purposes, supposed to be apolitical, right? And that's a whole other discussion about whether that's true or not. But I think for a lot of these people, their inclination to try to use the levers of power to kind of exact revenge, they're going to run into problems. Now, I think outside, it's different by different agency too. I can imagine scenarios where Trump is able to, and his kind of acolytes are able to kind of install people in different positions of power to maybe not prosecute, but definitely harass people. You can imagine them trying to use the IRS to go after people with audits or what have you, using different federal agencies to conduct investigations without pretext. So how successful they may be, it just kind of depends on what part of the government they're trying to use and kind of the built-in impediments there. Fortunately for us, I think the kind of these outlandish dream scenario, these revenge fantasies that the far right and kind of the MAGA movement has about that have really sound like kind of QAnon kind of at this point revenge fantasies about kind of arresting everybody and putting Adam Schiff in jail. That shit's not going to happen. But I think at the very least, I think Trump and his supporters and the people he puts into power can make life really difficult for a lot of people in many different ways. So we'll just have to see how that all plays out. So that's all to answer your question.
Sure.
I guess there would be yes and maybe.
Yeah, no, I actually want to dig into that a little bit more, if you don't mind. And, one of the things that I notice in my work is this sort of dichotomy on the far right and among the like different phases of the far right is to how much they are like personally loyal to Trump or to the Republican Party really is a like distinct difference. And one of the things I think we saw in 2019 with the rise of the Terrorgram people and the Atomwaffen stuff and the way that that sort of comes into play is in this sort of like Trump was disappointing enough long enough to certain elements of the far right that, you started to see this kind of rise of, I don't always like the term, but, for lack of a better term, the accelerationist kind of, terrorist like side of things. Right. And so like, for one thing, we certainly can argue, or we can kind of not argue, but like discuss, what happens for the people who are loyal to Trump, if he does or does not, pardon all of these people or some of these people or any of these people, et cetera, et cetera. But also like, I wonder like if he is seen by certain bits of the more fringy right, the more extreme right as to not going far enough in this matter, does that become a new source of like of a new stochastic terrorism in 2025 or moving forward if he's seen as being in some way like antithetical to their goals? And is that something you've considered, or is that something that like is something that you would necessarily worry about? Because that would mean, I think, this is controversial, but I think arguably the two Trump assassins or the attempted Trump assassins were, disaffected right wingers to some degree or another, to the degree that we can kind of understand them at all. And do we see more of that? Is that something that might be like kind of percolating in these people's heads of, if we want to maintain control, ultimately we have a tiger by the tail at this point. And so, there is this sense of like using the institutions to sort of like curb the impulses of their own worst members. And so I know that may be outside of your domain of like where you want to take this, but it's certainly something that I'm thinking about.
No, I think it's an important topic. I think it's an important thing to think about. And I think you put your finger on something. I think there has been plenty of evidence that many parts of the far right were disappointed with President-elect Trump's first term in office, especially around things like immigration. There was a lot of evidence of the far right that were disappointed, basically, that he didn't institute, essentially kind of a full stop on any immigration, legal or otherwise, and didn't kind of believe the kind of nonsense that he actually built the wall and all this kind of stuff. And I think that's, you saw that play out leading into the election day, when figures like Nick Fuentes basically said that, he wasn't going to like go out and vote for Trump or campaign for Trump, or however he put it, and other kind of elements of the far right and kind of the white nationalist movement said that as well. Like the leader of Patriot Front after the election gave his 10 or 20-minute diatribe to his supporters that basically said like, it's great that Trump got elected, but he's an imperfect vessel for our goals or whatever, and we don't really trust him particularly. A lot of what drives, I think, the mistrust of Trump within the far right is his overt support for Israel. Like that's a real contention for them. And so,
among the just to shortcut, among the people I follow, this is the like primary like mode of thought. Like this is kind of my wheelhouse here. So that maybe I'm taking you off your track a little bit, but please continue. I just wanted to kind of interject that like among the people I follow, this is like very mainstream thought. It's do we continue to reject Trump, or are we willing to wait and see? Is sort of the spectrum of opinion among the people I follow. So
yeah, and I think the way that plays out over the next 4 years, or however long Trump remains out, is, I think it depends on kind of what he does and kind of how things play out and who he listens to. But I think there is the possibility that it could kind of create kind of more kind of disaffected people within various parts of the far right. I think whether or not it leads to, kind of a increase in kind of accelerationist, kind of far right, violent extremist kind of actions is difficult to tell. I think one thing I've been very curious about, and it kind of relates to the immigration part of is how do extremist elements of kind of this xenophobic border militia types react to Trump's immigration policies? And if they don't think he's being hardline enough, if he's not, militarizing the border the way they want him to, if he is not actually deporting, rounding up and deporting millions of migrants and undocumented people, I think I could very easily see kind of those extremist elements of like the border militias and others down kind of near the U.S.-Mexico border kind of taking part in what amounts to kind of white supremacist terrorist actions, kind of. I think for me, that's a real worry.
I definitely agree with that. No, 100%. No, absolutely.
And I think, and then elsewhere, I think some of it just depends on kind of the internal dynamics of kind of the far right, like in who is influential at any given time, and kind of this ever kind of ebb and flow of like, because within the far right, there's like people have kind of, there's so many different centers of gravity right around, like, and there's so many different constituencies, and there's so many different kind of, people, like there's who is in favor, who is out of favor, right? And
and who is in favor within like the quarters of power versus who is in favor within kind of the broader movement, I think is another question. So there are like, not only there are multiple centers of power, there are multiple sources of power at this point, although I would argue that like within the people who are, at least within spitting distance of the mainstream, there is this like resolute focus on Trump, what Trump wants. I think that's something that I've been seeing by studying, Megyn Kelly and Jack Posobiec and, Charlie Kirk and those kind of figures in the last like few months. It is very much like, whatever Trump wants, Trump gets. And that's how you maintain favor within like that segment of the kind of media political infrastructure at this point. And I think these are the people that are like pushing the hardest at like, well, you gotta pardon them all. You gotta do, I mean, I was listening to Jack Posobiec just before we got on this call, and he's literally calling for, we got to get revenge for Ashley Babbitt at this point. Like he's going much further than, anything that you're seeing in like the New York Times or Fox News or anything like that. And this is still a relatively mainstream source, within the confines of these things. So again, sorry to interrupt, but, just wanted to point that out,
No, I mean, I think I agree. I think there's multiple levels to this. Like, I think you have kind of what, I think you and I would consider kind of the mainstream of kind of right-wing discourse, kind of like this Fox News kind of ecosystem. And then you have kind of a level down where you have like things like Human Events and Jack Posobiec and Breitbart and everything else. And then you have another level down where you have things like Gateway Pundit and like kind of all these other kind of conspiracy kind of laden places. And I think also kind of, I'm going to be interested in, I think this time around, and this has been kind of openly discussed, I think, within kind of the political kind of chattering class, about how this time around a lot more kind of DC establishment Republican types are really interested in working within the Trump administration, right? Like when he first took office in 2016, it was really difficult for them to staff the White House and the rest of the executive agency. And this time around, it's basically like, everybody at the Heritage Foundation, everybody at America First Policy Institute, all these right-wing think tanks, like there's going to be filling spots. And so I wonder how that's going to kind of play out. And if before, because you had so many more fringe figures that ended up in the administration. And so now it's like an open question of whether or not, I think he's publicly said he's not going to be in an administration, but whether or not somebody like Michael Flynn, right, would end up in this version of the Trump White House is kind of an open question. Like, I think, and so, and will that change over time? Like you'll have this influx of all these kind of young conservative right wingers from all these different kind of establishment DC think tanks or kind of staffers of GOP members of Congress, whoever that kind of fill in the administration. And will over time, will they kind of filter out and you'll get more fringe figures? And then on top of that, you have to kind of consider the fact that like within these kind of establishment spaces, whether it's think tanks or kind of staffers and other places, there's plenty of people that are kind of button up. They're button up their suit and tie, but they're definitely on the fringe ideologically. Like there's a lot of groypers.
Yeah, these are like the 26-year-olds who are coming in now. Were 16 listening to Andrew Anglin and The Daily Show back in 2016, right? Like it's like they just know to hide their power level better because of what they saw in the first Trump administration. Like now they're adults. I mean, Darren Beattie is obviously, or not obviously, but arguably one of these people. And he has a very kind of cushy position within certain like media ecosystems. I mean, Jack Posobiec himself was like a character within these movements who just managed to like not talk enough about the Jews to keep his position within this ecosystem. And obviously that's not within the quarters of power, but I think that I think a lot of these young Republicans are not, they're Nazis. They're just secret Nazis. They've just learned to not say it out loud.
One of the more arguably influential and kind of prominent kind of young Republican groups is the New York Young Republican Club, which is essentially it's a young fascist club organization. Like they are quite literally kind of neo-fascist, kind of embrace kind of various like Hungarian fascist ideologies and things. And so I could easily see a lot of those kids enter the halls of power that way too. I mean, and like you said, like, they've learned their lesson. Like you're not going to catch Paul Gosar's staffers anymore posting on, 4chan or wherever and get caught kind of peddling well, not that that's even controversial anymore. Like I was about to say peddling race science, but that's kind of become in so many places now.
Yeah. I mean, we might not find like a 26-year-old staffer with a secret Reddit account or a secret 4chan account, but apparently, according to some reporting, we might find Elon Musk with a secret 4chan account. Anyway, I know we're far afield. Jack, I'm sorry. I've been dominating this conversation for a bit. I know you've had a lot of stuff you wanted to talk about. So if you want to take the reins of this, I've taken us far afield because I think it's fun. But no.
You've saved me asking the questions I was going to ask, really. So
no, I mean,
yeah,
I think those are important things to kind of think through. These are kind of the second level questions when you think about kind of what this administration is going to look like. I think it's important to start thinking about the reality of having so many of these people in power and what it may look like over time. And also important to kind of think through the ways in which fissures and divisions will start showing up in the far right, Because I think one thing that the right has always done really well, the left has really had a difficult time kind of replicating this. The right has always been good at identifying kind of the fissures and divisions within the left and pushing on them in order to break up the coalitions within the left very effectively. And the left just hasn't been as effective at doing that within the right. And there are plenty of those kind of fissures and divisions within the right. It's just kind of identifying them and kind of figuring out ways to exploit them. So yeah, I think it's an important discussion, especially when you consider kind of who are the kind of vocal, kind of influential talking heads. I mean, I think when someone like Laura Loomer is getting headlines, I mean, that seems like only a win-win for people that want to oppose fascism, right? Because
what is there a more clown-like figure in American politics than Laura Loomer?
I mean, I literally popped popcorn and sat there with my Twitter timeline as kind of you saw these like figures like argue about whether or not X was a place for free speech anymore. You know what I mean? It was just like this amazing confluence of events. And I think that might be a kind of a silver lining for people like us, is we'll get to enjoy a lot more of that nonsense in the coming years. The far right is if they're anything, they're buffoonish and entertaining. So like that's
not to dispute your point about the clownishness of Laura Loomer, but really at this point, is Elon Musk any less clownish? And whereas Laura Loomer has apparently failed to insinuate herself permanently at the top levels of this movement. Elon Musk has, for all the supposed disagreements and tensions, he's clearly succeeded, and he is pretty much now. I mean, he just recently changed his handle on Twitter to a Nazi meme. Keckius Maximus, because the guy is
literally a 2015 era like Nazi meme.
Yeah, it's a Gamergate. It's a teenage Gamergate.
Yeah, like
fucking
this is
meme.
not even a current meme. Like it's an old meme. It's a stale meme.
Yeah.
Like come on, Elon. Like you gotta step up your game, guy. But yeah, my take on that is $200 billion goes a long way. As in terms of like he has, although it turns out he's not going to be Speaker of the House, as I was seeing on my news feed. What is his name? Johnson was reelected to that position. So
that's right. He got his 218 on the first ballot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this actually hooks into something that I wanted to mention, which is that there was a lot of chatter in some quarters leading up to this election of the speaker for this new term of Congress about there's all these. I mean, this stuff, the big argument about H-1B and the supposed tensions between Musk and Trump, and the argument between Loomer and Trump via his pseudonym Adrian Dittman, etc. There's been a lot of talk about all this stuff in some quarters. All these, MAGA is coming apart. The base are angry, and sure, but I think what people perennially miss about certainly sort of mainstream commentators perennially miss is that internal conflict is constitutive to fascist movements. I mean, you were talking earlier, Teddy, about the possibility, border militia people might, dissatisfied with Trump's immigration policy or whatever, they might conceivably take to the terroristic methods. Yeah, sure. And the trouble with that is that sort of thing, the radicalism of these fringe aspects, they push the leadership forward, even as the leadership disavows them and stuff like that. And this leads me to, I think what I was going to ask was, what I hear from all this is like a huge recipe for chaos. I mean, Project 2025, people in the Trump administration are going to be trying to institute Project 2025, which is going to be, they're incredibly ambitious and they're very fanatical ideologues, these people. So they're going to go for this. They're going to go for all this stuff that they say they're going to go for. I think, the mass deportations and the complete overhaul of the administrative state, the destruction of, they're going to go for it. And it's going to create chaos. Putting Kash Patel in charge of the FBI, if that happens, that's a great example. That's going to cause chaos because he is a fanatical ideologue who's going to try to do the ludicrous things that he says he wants to do. The trouble with that, I think I worry about the mainstream conversation, the mainstream reporting on this is going to be, chaos, inefficiency, none of it's working, missing the fact that the chaos is so often it's how they get things done. I mean, the Project 2025's, Schedule F, the project to get rid essentially of career civil servants and replace them as sort of regime loyalists. It sounds to me like that's going to mesh very well, potentially, with the kind of project that you've been talking about to destroy the legal process of investigation and prosecution of January 6th defendants.
Yeah, I think what you'll see is there's going to be kind of multiple layers of things that are happening all at the same time. I mean, I think I tend to think kind of through what it was like back in 2017 when Trump took office the first time and kind of the chaos that we saw, particularly in that first 3-6 months, that first year, right? It was just kind of these nonstop chaotic things that were happening. And I think we're going to see something similar again. And I think it's going to be, and that's part of the recipe. That's part of the effectiveness of all of this, right? You are going to have a lot of noise in different places, all happening at the same time. Some of it's strategic. Some of it is just kind of a feature of kind of this kind of style of far-right authoritarian kind of pseudo-populist kind of ideology and how they govern. And so, Trump's going to come into office. They're going to try to do a lot of executive actions all at once again, just like they did in 2017. And they're going to kind of what Steve Ben famously said, flood the field with shit or whatever he said. And create a lot of distractions. And so there's going to be that happening. There's also going to be I think one thing is to be different is like kind of the media and social media environment is just much different now than it was back in 2017, right? And so that's going to be kind of a variable of how this kind of what narratives take hold, and what the media decides to cover in certain ways. Like that's going to be a big question mark. But at the same time that all this is happening, I think you're right. There's going to be, we were talking earlier about this influx of all these people from places like the Heritage Foundation and all these other, right-wing think tanks that are going to try to establish and kind of create all these different policies from this Project 2025 playbook. I think we're going to see them kind of do that. And I mean, I think it's more likely than not, that they'll be much more efficient this time around at instituting policy. Not necessarily because like Trump has learned any lessons or kind of the people that he surrounds himself that have learned lessons, but I think by nature of who will be filling the executive branch, they'll just be more effective at doing it. They will have more people with more experience within the government.
I mean, I like to think the apparatus has like made itself around Trump's image to a certain degree. Like, that's kind of the big story of 2024 election to, the next couple of years. I think that's really going to be the big picture. At least that's my feeling of it is, now he's got a whole apparatus around him that is supporting him because he's the winner now. And I think the fact that he won in 2024 crystallized that in a real way, because I wasn't seeing it to this degree until he won. Like there was still like skepticism until he won. And now that he's won, it's like, all right, all, streets ahead.
Well, I mean, on top of that, you have all the different guardrails that have been removed for him, these quote unquote guardrails. The kind of the institutional structures that were impediments to him during his first term, including, the Supreme Court basically saying
most especially the Supreme Court. I think that, I think you care. Sorry, this as an avid 5-4 listener from the beginning, this is, you can't overstate the importance of like the reshaping of the Supreme Court by Donald Trump. And, for the next 4 years, he's probably going to get like 2 more justices on. He will like have personally appointed half the Supreme Court at some point. It's insane. It's absurd. It's like, so again, sorry not to interrupt, but like, no, this is real bad. I don't know. We're kind of wrapping up here, but if you have a big picture, like statement is like, things are bad right now.
And so the kind of major impediments that he will face will be the courts. And so not the Supreme Court, but a lot of the lower courts. I mean,
Yep.
Biden and the Democrats in Congress were successful at appointing a lot of judges to appellate courts. And so that's, depending on the jurisdiction, there will be some impediments there. While there will be less institutional pushback, I think a lot of kind of the kind of progressive legal apparatus, various nonprofit legal organizations I will give them credit, they have been preparing for the eventuality that Trump would be reelected for more than a year. There's going to be plenty of organizations, whether it's like the ACLU or, the various kind of LGBT legal defense funds and all these other legal orgs that are going to be dropping lawsuits kind of many times, like the minute after Trump signs executive actions, they're going to be facing legal challenges, any kind of when they try to change rules, agency rules, those are all going to face challenges. So while Trump and his people within his administration might not face any kind of real kind of institutional impediments from the kind of rank and file kind of civil servants as they did last time, they're going to still be, every kind of move they make is going to be challenged. And so, I mean, we're just going to have to see how it all plays out. I think where we'll see a more difficult time of that is kind of how Trump can will power, if he can figure out how to will power in creative ways that, the people that want to oppose his administration haven't thought of. That's going to be kind of the chess game. And if the people around, I mean, I'm sure when you kind of watch these figures, I'm sure that people like Steve Miller have been spending the last year just dreaming up like all kinds of ways in which they can kind of exert power and kind of do end runs around kind of the checks to the executive branch. So it's going to be, I don't know if fascinating is the right word, but it's going to be fascinating to see how this all works out over the next year or two. And we'll see it kind of almost immediately, right? This is going to be like a tsunami is going to hit us on January 20th, right? We're not going to have to wait. It's going to see how this all plays out. It's going to happen in our faces almost immediately. And we didn't even get into like the more obscure people within the movement. Like, I mean, there's like Nick Fuentes and then those guys, but then there's like the weird people that are kind of a level down, you know, like
Beards and Beardley was like strangely relevant for about 15 minutes, you know, like, and I'm like, yeah, I've been tracking that guy since 2017. What are you talking about? You know?
Oh, my favorite recently is I've gotten a lot of mileage out of this is because the GOP is just like full on conspiracy mode now. Is like I've been able to talk a lot about kind of the chemtrail conspiracy people.
Sure, yeah.
They're introducing bills all over the country now recently.
It's just gonna like we haven't even talked about like that level of things like the conspiracism that's just like built into like, and now it's not just like the people on the ground like doing the chemtrail nonsense who are like kind of harmless. Now it's like legislators who are like talking about this shit. It's like, yeah, no, this is, oh God. The next 4 years, my friends, I'm reminded there's a moment right after George W. Bush was elected, Stephen Belzer was on the Daily Show when, you know, and forgive me for talking about Jon Stewart in a positive way, but Stephen Belzer had Richard Belzer. He had a line. It's like, the world is going to burn to ashes, but you and I, my friend, will eat like kings. And that's kind of where we are. We will eat like kings, you know.
My favorite part of kind of following the chemtrail stuff is like the random people that I found like that are like into it. Like Naomi Wolf. What the fuck? I mean, I know she's been gone for a while, but the fact that she now spends so much time on Twitter just posting random pictures of clouds and is like, oh my God, look at this. Yeah. I'm like, oh my God, Naomi.
Well,
what the?
It turns out.
I was about to butt in a minute ago and say Naomi Wolf is eyeing up state legislatures. You know, she thinks my time has come. I can get someone finally to deal with this square cloud issue.
I haven't looked at Naomi Wolf in so long. Like the moment when she wrote an entire book and then went to promote her book, and like a single question of like, that's not what the thing you said means. It's like death recorded does not mean they were executed. It actually means they were not executed. And if you knew how to read these documents, if you had even a 1% of the level of knowledge you bring to have in this matter, and like I can't imagine. I just like that's a level of embarrassment. Like I would go off and never be seen again. I would become a hermit, like sitting in a cave somewhere, you know.
That event, Matthew Sweet just completely dismantling the central thesis of her entire book in one televised interview. That is what drove her mad. I mean, that is what is at the root of all of this.
She was bad before, but she is now just like, just beyond.
I would argue that Naomi Wolf's like most significant crime, though, was forcing Naomi Klein to have to write a book. Basically said, "This is not me.
I'm the good one. I'm the good one. It's fine." Yeah. No.
It's funny. I nearly raised Naomi Klein earlier because I was thinking about, the shock doctrine as sort of that idea of like the chaos being an opportunity for them.
Sure. Yeah.
And that has come out. I've brought that book up a lot in the last few months in relation to kind of all the kind of climate chaos that we've been seeing. And in relation to like how extremist movements take advantage of it too, like what we saw kind of from these militia groups in Appalachia, kind of taking advantage of the hurricane, and we've seen other kind of white movements take advantage of kind of these natural disasters, like the Patriot Front handing out like water and stuff in Ohio after the train derailment, like all that kind of shit.
Well, Alex McNabb of the Daily Show was literally a victim of Hurricane Helene. He was in some of the like news coverage at the time. And like I couldn't find like the particular Telegram post. I was like looking for them, and it's like, but apparently he was like pictured in like super local news coverage on this stuff, and like was absolutely using it as propaganda. And then there were other people who were like, we're going to go hand out water and blankets and food, et cetera, et cetera. So like these right wingers are definitely going to use all this, the increasing instability caused by climate change. It's just, they're going to use any crisis to their advantage.
Well,
that's what
we
they
saw
do.
it, didn't we? First time round, Trump presidency.
Yeah.
That caused chaos enough by itself. And then the complete mishandling of the COVID pandemic beginning. The chaos caused by that's, all these people, they were on that like flies on shit.
Well, and the response to the uprising, even, like, I don't know, I was going to say even more so, but I think it's kind of 50-50 ultimately. But, certainly, Antifa gets to burn down cities, and we can't even, Antifa gets to burn down cities, and we don't even get to walk through the Capitol, peacefully, little grandmas carrying lecterns. Yeah. That's a crime now. Sedition against the U.S. government,
I think,
why is RFK Jr. going to be in charge of American healthcare? That's why.
Yeah, exactly.
I think climate change is like kind of the perfect kind of example of kind of why Trump got reelected, right? Because like Americans, like we have bad short-term memory and we can't think very far ahead. Like we can't fix climate because like if it's more than like a month away, like we know the Super Bowl is about to happen, but we don't fucking know what's going to happen a year from now, much less 10 years from now, right? That's like not relevant to us. I think a big part of it was like, I think most Americans forgot what happened like for 8 years. Like most Americans don't remember what 2017 was like. I don't think. It feels like everybody just forgot like that there was like chaos at the airports, when that Muslim ban and all this stuff, like all this stuff happened. And it feels like so many people just kind of memory hold it. And the same with COVID, like that was the end of the Trump administration that last year, and it was fucking nuts. But I think when you look at kind of the breadth of American history, like we don't do things to fix things unless it gets just astronomically bad, right? The New Deal arguably wouldn't have happened without the Depression being as bad as it was, right? We had to have like a decade of just like wretched poverty for like millions of Americans before we passed like the New Deal and like these basic social safety nets that were eventually passed by Europe and everybody else. Like we still don't have universal health care or whatever. But I think like
and the entire story of American politics since the New Deal has been the attempt to destroy it.
Yeah.
And then the financial crisis, like I think the fact that we saved the economy prevented us from kind of instituting the real reforms that were needed, right?
Yeah.
And COVID,
and arguably, I saw some commentary on this, the other, just like yesterday or something, is like Obama had the opportunity, but if he had taken the opportunity to really regulate the banks and to like use his political capital on this, you wouldn't have gotten the Affordable Care Act, and that was like his priority. And so, like, I don't know, like I'm not defending Obama here, but I think there, like once you understand how the power works, once you understand how these people make decisions, it is like one of those like, look, if I was in that situation, do I really stick it to the banks and like crush the financial system and I will definitely only get one term and I'm not going to get any of my other legislative agenda done? Or do I play soft and like try to do the best I can on my other stuff? And, like, I don't know. The more I try to understand politics, the more I do not understand like electoral politics in the slightest and like what's actually going on in these people's heads. It's something that fascinates me, but it's ultimately like an unknowable fog to me. That's where I land on it like 90% of the time these days.
Right. And then with COVID, I think we kind of got lucky. Like COVID wasn't like, it was horrible.
COVID wasn't that bad. COVID wasn't that bad, like
nowhere near worst case scenario, right?
Yeah.
You had like 1 million people die, but the mortality rate was relatively low. It wasn't near what like the Spanish flu was or all these other pandemics. And also it was like the Spanish flu like killed a lot of young people, a lot of young, healthy people in their teens or 20s, right? That didn't happen with COVID. And also COVID like if you live where I live in Texas and different places, kind of like COVID, it was really difficult to see kind of the effects of COVID. Kind of like it wasn't like people that lived in bigger like cities and kind of more urban areas where like there was a lot of death and people kind of saw kind of the freezer trucks out on the sidewalk because so many people like that just didn't happen in a lot of red states. And so I think you had this kind of these two realities that were happening. And so, like, I think that was a big problem of it. And so I'm terrified of what might happen, like, if we get hit by another pandemic, especially in the next 4 years, like much worse. Like, we're like,
can you imagine? Can you imagine it comes 2024 and there's another global pandemic that happens because Trump cut another government agency, like with RFK as head of HHS? Like, this is. Like entirely possible. This is entirely possible. Like, let's kill another. It might
even be happening.
Yeah.
Well, then it might be like a measles pandemic. You know, you never know. Oh my god, it's so easy to get really dark at this point.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of where we live, unfortunately. You know, but you know, yeah. If we were studying history 50 years from now, we would say, oh, that's a fascinating era of history. The thing is, we get to live through it, so you know, it's always best to see it from behind. You know, but you know, so that's where we are. Yeah.
I don't know if that thing about the Chinese curse, "May you live in interesting times." I don't know if that's real or apocryphal, but it is pithy either way.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show again, Teddy. Where can our listeners find your work if they don't already know where to find it, which I find unlikely, but tell them anyway, just in case.
Yeah, you can find my work online. You can subscribe to my newsletter. It's at radicalreports.org. I have a free and paid version on social media. My handle is Report by Wilson. Although primarily I'm on Bluesky at the moment. I no longer post anything on Twitter/X. Mostly you'll find me on Bluesky. That's been one of a nice bright spot over the last few months. Has been kind of this a real resurgence and kind of flowering of kind of this community on Bluesky. It's been something really kind of wonderful to watch how that has kind of come about.
Yeah, very, very much so. I am personally a $5 subscriber to Teddy here, so can highly recommend. It's essential reading every day, so check it out if you are so inclined.
Absolutely. And thanks for listening, listeners, and listen again when there's something new to listen to, which there will be very soon.